pairing early work with recent work came about because of a residency that I took at Montello in Nevada, which is focused on artists that work with the environment. And I had never done an artist residency. I raised children, I taught, I had a very active exhibition career, 10 major public works, including the convention center downtown. And I had never had the opportunity to get away myself and reflect. I'd always been juggling lots of things simultaneously. And so it was a revelation for me to be alone with myself. And there's a purity where you're only having a conversation with yourself. Most of my work is, and including the work I did at Montello, I'm always thinking of myself as a citizen of the world and involved in issues that are bigger than just me. And that was true there, and it's been true of my work all along. So pairing it with the particular body of work I have here, which comes from a series called Atlas of the Interior, was at a time in my life where I felt very trapped. I was recently divorced. The Gulf War, Desert Storm, had started. I remember the morning that I woke up and I heard the news, and it was just devastating. It felt like we were on the brink of World War III. We are now at a point where we're just used to war is something that is part of daily life and has been since then. And but seeing the oil fields burning, it was very clear. That was a conflict that involved 39 countries. It was very clear that there were large things afoot. And I was feeling trapped as a young mother, recently divorced, camping in my studio. My kids and I had to go to the YMCA to take showers and so forth. And so the world seemed very abstract and very different. Not different, that's different than it had the day before, I guess, is what I mean. And so I started to think about how we talk about the world all the time, but it's an abstraction. And it is also an abstraction that is dominated by borders and all sorts of artificial things. There's a print in the show that is reminiscent of old maps, like Renaissance era maps. The piece is called Mappa Cordis, and it's a map projection that was actually pretty common during the 14 and 1500s, which is depicting the world as a heart, and which is of no use if you're going to actually navigate the world. But map makers at that time really felt that the force of human thought and experience shaped the world. And I thought, that's, yes, as arbitrary as that map may look, that in fact these wars and conflicts have this quality of subjectivity and kind of tribal interests. And so the map became both a vehicle for my yearning from my trapped position, and I have to admit, I'm an old idealist that, why can't we just embrace the world and value it? And so since that point, questions of the environment have continued through my work, even sometimes abstractly. So the idea then was, based on being alone with reflection, I thought about the decades of my work, and when you're inside it as an artist, you are compelled to do work. And I never was looking for commonalities, and that when I would say, look at slides of my old work, it would seem to me like this series is really different from that series. It's different than that series. But as I was spending time consciously considering that in a quiet place, that I started to see that there are leapfrogging things that reoccur, the kind of fragmentation, the kind of agitation, the kind of arrested movement. I've always been an avid follower of dance. Actually, maybe I would have wanted to be a dancer at some point. And so I've included a video of a collaboration with Deb Lowen, Wild Space, and John Erickson, that if you look at my work from the standpoint that the sculpture has a sense of arrested motion. One of the big map pieces that's on the floor, I always think of it as a belly flop, like you fall on your face and your arm comes over as you hit the ground, and it's the earth taking a big belly flop. So as I put the show up and I see it together, this is the first time I'm pairing old work and new work in a way that sets up a dialogue. It's connected, and to me it feels connected, but the expression might be as different as taking a jackknife and minutely separating layers of sagebrush is not that much different than taking an X-Acto knife and slicing a painting that I've made on Belgian linen. I look around and it makes me feel whole. When I was young, I thought that being an artist meant that I had to learn how to do everything. It's kind of like the Michelangelo syndrome. He could paint, he could sculpt, he could draw, he could, all of that is that I remember reading Lust for Life and the Agony and the Ecstasy when I was in grade school. And I thought that's what you needed to do. So I started early and I learned a lot of different disciplines. And because of that, there is no one place that I land in terms of material. Often, especially when it comes to my public work, people will ask what media that is. And I have the knowledge because I've had great curiosity. That's one of my characteristics that, I've always watched people in the building trades since my earliest recollection is 2 years old. And so how things are built and made, or how images come into being, this has always been a fascination. So it gives me the ability to go with a material that expresses what I need to say, that all materials have a backstory. They're not neutral. So, a piece like The Blind Leading the Blind here is Tree of Heaven sumac, which is an invasive species. So it's not a random choice. It is part of what the piece is saying about urban wasteland. But then I'll turn around and do a bronze. Or then I'll do, a pocket park that is enormous, that's cement and using the materials that fences are made of. And so that is a hard question to answer, other than to say that the bottom line is that the significance of material is part of the expression. And so unlike, say, a photographer who knows that they're going to do all their prints to be 18 by 24, I plant myself more firmly as a sculptor, where you're always starting from zero, from nothing. So even if my works are on paper, the size of them, scale, the relation to the human body. I'm a person who is very engrossed in sensory experience. So even like last night, one of the things that I love to do at night is walk out of my bedroom, which is very dark, into the main room, which is lit by the city. And when I go to bed, my eyes can hardly see that. But in the middle of the night, I just get this delight that I can see because my eyes have been closed. And so that may be the beginning of an idea right there, is that it's a fascination with the sensate, and especially touch. And I never, you never say never. I don't see myself as an artist that will work in digital form as a final product. I use a lot of digital tools all the time, SketchUp and Photoshop and all of that kind of stuff, and that I'm an avid researcher, but I think that I've planted myself in the physical world and in the idea that it's important that some things can only be experienced firsthand, and that the resonance of really being there is what I'm committed to. And so I hope that the works that I make are experiences for people that are unique and different and quirky, sometimes a little funny, but always very real. I taught at MyEd for 29 years and developed the sculptural curriculum, and I think that many people currently are very aware of the bronze casting facility. And first of all, that was part of the job description for me to develop it. But also it was important to me because when I went to school as a young woman, there weren't women in sculpture. When I learned to weld, which was in high school, the principal of the school said, well, you have to let this girl learn how to weld. But the guy that taught welding refused to. He said, here's a book, there's a place. When I studied bronze casting in college, which was required then, the girls weren't allowed on the pour floor. But I had a different background as well. My father was an engineer in the steel business, and we moved every 2 or 3 years, and his job was primarily to build and put into operation a steel plant. So in my deep experience are these, sooty steel towns, and watching these blast furnaces and listening to my father and my uncle talking about steel and engineering. And so to me, bronze casting was just as natural to me as if I, had grown up in a family that was, was something else. And so it's almost like following in the family business. So developing the bronze foundry there, I did that while other schools were shutting them down. The curriculum I developed at MyEd was, in a way, kind of like Montessori, only for college students, which is put it all out there. Experience all of these options, and you find yourself in that. I actually, included stone carving, but I also included learning SketchUp. I also included things like one of the first problems that I gave as a teacher was take one straight pen and command as much space as possible. So I really wanted a curriculum that was focused on giving students the opportunity to find their passion rather than my defining it. A lot of bronze programs, that the few that exist around the country, are generally driven by an artist who that's their major expression. And you study what they do. I always tried to teach what I knew, what was available, how to research, how to move into more sophisticated work in a particular medium. And there's an old adage in sculpture called truth to materials. So if you're going to work in bronze, then work with the character and quality of that. Now and then I return to it, but to me bronze is no more important to me than sticks. It's another material, and it's one that I'm comfortable with. And it has a big history, especially related to war. That when one country invades another, and we saw that, when the USSR was divided up and the Lenin sculptures were melted down, and in fact some sculptors said, let's make a Christopher Columbus and give it to the United States. That was a hard sculpture to find a home for, needless to say. But the point is that bronze is a medium that politically has been a tool, even into modern times. Is melt this down, make a cannon. The war ends, melt the cannons, make some sculptures to honor the heroes. And I am not comfortable with monuments to heroes. I totally am against that. But I think when I chose to use bronze for the two pieces that are in the show here, it was, again, because bronze has that history. Art, war, art, war, art, war. I am compelled to transform things. I'm an avid composter, have been for 40 years, but I see things and they call to me to be engaged with and transformed. Now, sometimes I do work completely from scratch, from observation, like those bronzes are an example. But sometimes I'll just be driving down the street and put on the brakes and jump out. And so for the two pieces, Mappus Mundi and Terra Incognito, are from a series of pieces that I had found a kind of a half-round dresser. It was just on the curb, and I loved the shape of it, but it was too big to get in my car. And so I went back to my studio and I got a handsaw. And I was remembering just that morning I had read this crazy article about a scientist who claimed that the universe had a finite end, and that it was shaped kind of like the wedge of an orange, is the way he described it, And so I went back with my saw and I cut it in half, but this way, like sliced through, not vertically, but horizontally through on this angle, thinking, this is the shape of the universe. And I threw it in my car and went back and subsequently did several pieces in that series. And these are two of them. And they became, that shape captivated me for a while when I was enlisted to be the artist working with Woodland Pattern for the Milwaukee Convention Center. There are doorways in there to the meeting rooms that are that wedge shape. And so that's one reason I put this show up, is because there's a definite tie into that's where that work came from. But here I found myself in two very extremely different situations, which is I had no money. I was a young artist, and I pick up something on the street, and then all of a sudden I have this enormous $150,000 budget. It's talk about an extreme. But I'm an opportunist. I think that finally is, I'm kind of like a crow or something like that. I'm just, I'm always finding these opportunities. And so, anyway, with the convention center then, I was brought on board when all they had designed was outside of the building and the floor plan. And I looked at it and I said, well, can I work with the elevation since you don't have anything there yet? And subsequently did 23 sculptural portals that incorporated the writing of 48 artists. And I was just as comfortable working with tradespeople, cabinet makers, and electricians, and being there with a hard hat and running a crew, because I had a factory background between my dad, and also I worked in factories when I was in school. And so it was, to me, as natural a material as taking a handsaw. But then fast forward to going to Nevada. And this was a residency where I was totally alone. Once I got off the highway, it took the better part of an hour and 20 minutes at 9 miles an hour over rutted roads into the sagebrush ocean. And the building was like being on a houseboat on the sea. It actually was raised a little bit. And it was just 2 rooms, the studio and then the other room. And before I went, I did a lot of research. I thought I'd do a lot of research on Nevada. I had just finished a collaborative project with a German-American artist, Liz Bachhuber, who's originally from here, that had to do with the environment and kind of cross-cultural and so forth. And so I thought, yeah, I'm going to continue with working on that. They had like a composting toilet, and it was completely a green thing, but I was completely alone. I arrived there and realized that I was completely off base on my preconceptions of what I was going to encounter there. And all I had packed was a few hand tools, a little bit of paper, some sketchbooks. I have a cabinet in my studio that has a lot of different drawing materials. I had put together a box where I just went through and I just threw things in, not knowing what I wanted from it. And I included, I had a packet of brightly colored paper that I had held on for years and years. And every time I'd open that drawer, I'd say, yeah, I should do something with this. And then I'd close the drawer again. So I thought, I'll throw it in there. I have enough, there's still 2 inches in this box. I'll throw that in there. And so I arrived there and I was completely off base. But I also realized I had the opportunity to be completely immersed. And so the next morning I woke up and I took a Swiss Army knife out of my toolbox. And I said that this is the only tool I'm going to work with, and I'm going to gather the materials, and I'm going to really know this place. So I started gathering only the sticks that were cast off from the plants because of the stress of drought and wind, and those shapes come from the wind. And I started working with that. And so because it was so quiet, I ended up being very frugal even about sound, that the sound of the wind was more important than, some artists, play music and keep a momentum in their studio. I'm not that way. I listen to ambient sound and I'm general silence. And so I worked with what materials were there, and I think it's because I am by nature an opportunist. If you give me an inch, I'll take a mile. You know, that I wasn't thrown by that. But what surprised me really was the drama of color. Totally unexpected. And I love color. I don't work with color that much in my work, but it's one of those sensory pleasures that I'm always very, very aware of, and now and then it comes forward. And so I thought, oh, I've got this colored paper. So I started matching it to get precisely those colors at a particular moment, because when you look over, I could see way to the mountains, the basin that I was on. I think you could see 20 miles. You know, at night, the stars were unbelievable, the clarity. So color was so subtly changing all the time. It was like watching a film or something like that. It was like, that was the Netflix that was happening. And so I had to capture the color. And in these pieces, what I also was capturing in kind of abstracted form is a sense of space in which the color was in the landscape, whether it was a bone that had, you know, like kind of a knotted form but then had a hole in it, or it was the way I would sit on the porch and the sunrise would be way back to my right, and I'd have to turn around and see it coming up this way. And so spatially, these wall pieces are very much like landscapes. And the other material, since I took some sketchbooks, but then the other material I worked with was my own refuse, which was all of the jackets from the books that I was reading, the boxes of oatmeal, and you know, everything that's the maps that I had, is that I just started working with the things that I would have been compelled to take out with me because they couldn't be composted on the site, that I was responsible for every bit of my garbage in a pristine environment in which I only found 2 invasive plant species, which were cheatgrass and something else. There was hardly any evidence of that. Or at night, the evidence that I had of other human beings was seen of the, you know, flashing of a satellite. You know, that it was so minor by comparison that all of a sudden this heap of paper refuse I was making became big. And so they were collaged onto these pieces. And much as I think of most of my work as choreographing people in space, I was delighted to see a couple people walk through and they look at it flat on it and they're like, oh, look, you know, like this and this. And what interests me is the fact that they're moving and they're having an engagement with something that prompted them to do that. And so getting back to being the opportunist that I am, is that I see potential everywhere. And I know that I was like that as a young child because I see it in my grandchildren. My grandchildren do the craziest things, and I think I've kept that child. I think that being an artist is keeping your child in you as well. One time I gave a prompt to some fellow artists in a group studio. We had every month we'd get together and take turns and to have a discussion. And the prompt that I gave my fellow artists was name 3 to 5 things, because you know I'm a material and physical maker. You know, making with the hands is important to me. Things that imprinted upon you, that mattered so much, and that you still see the influence of those things in your work today. And I took on the prompt for myself as well. And so one of my answers was Carmen red Prismacolor pencils. When I was 5, my mother had a set of Prismacolor pencils, and I went right through them. But the Carmen red, I loved it not because of the color. You know, people ask you, what's your favorite color? I've never had a favorite color. I loved the Carmen red because it has this kind of, it's very unique. It's a little orangey, a little pinky, a little reddy, a little, you know, it's this funny color, and it is very distinct from a paint color or anything else. It's kind of unique to Prismacolor pencils, is this Carmen red. But when I was young, I saved it for special use in my drawings, where all of a sudden I wanted like an oomph, or I wanted something really special. I kept that pencil until I graduated from high school, and it was only this long, is that I just savored it, metered it out. It was precious to me. I went to college, and I walked into an art supply store for the first time in my life and realized I could buy as many Carmen red pencils as I wanted. But the point is that how that color was and could be used was that important to me and that precious to me. And things in the world are that precious to me. And I think that comes out in my work. Another thing that was very important is every summer I spent time at my aunt and uncle's farm, and my aunt ran an egg business. And one of my favorite things to do was to collect the eggs, but most favorite was to go down into her creepy basement and candle the eggs. And so the little gizmo, which literally then was a candle, and looking into the eggs in this kind of drama of life and potential and the actual candlelight and the dark and kind of the mystery of it was impactful. And then finally, this was only a few years ago that I met with these other artists and we were talking about these things, was the film The Day the Earth Stood Still. And any chance I get to watch that film, I watch it again. And so, you know, I can, just saying that, you can see how it relates to some of the work in here. But it wasn't until my husband, Jake Fuller, who did the video, this is now 2001, so, you know, video technology has come a distance since he recorded Triangulation, my collaboration with Deb Lowen and John Erickson in Wild Space. Anyway, while he was editing it, and we finally looked at it, which was about a year ago. It had been in the can. We hadn't looked at it. It was just something that he captured, and you know, some of it's pretty dark because it's on a stage and it's with the stage lighting, and so we never saw it as having potential as being like, you know, film festival or something like that. But watching it, all of a sudden I realized that it was like recreating the day the earth stood still, but in our quirky way. And it just surprised me that something like that can be in the deep of your psyche. Intuition isn't something that's some like random id that's out of control. It's something that is formed in a person, and that movie actually is, you know, kind of deep within my DNA. So here you have it.